Well, family members are devastated after a new mother was shot and killed by her husband, who then took his own life. It all happened in Brookwood Hospital less than 24 hours ago. A Jefferson County coroner's report says Precious Johnson was shot multiple times. Authorities say she was a patient in the hospital. Family members say the 24-year-old had just had a baby with her husband, 19-year-old Kenneth Terry Jr. According to the coroner, Terry died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Homewood police think the hospital shooting was a domestic-related murder-suicide.
On March 1, 2026, inside the Women's Center of Baptist Health Brookwood Hospital in Homewood, Alabama, 24-year-old Precious Johnson was found dead from multiple gunshot wounds. Just minutes later, 19-year-old Kenneth William Terry Jr. was also pronounced dead from what investigators determined to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The two had recently welcomed their first child, and Johnson was still a patient recovering from childbirth at the time of the shooting. Law enforcement responded to reports of gunfire around 9:25 p.m., placing the hospital on lockdown while securing the scene. Authorities quickly classified the incident as a domestic murder-suicide. No other patients or staff were injured. As investigators reconstructed the sequence of events, questions emerged about how a firearm entered a hospital setting, what led to the confrontation, and whether earlier warning signs had been overlooked in the days leading up to the fatal incident. Here we deliver clear, factual, and up-to-date true crime stories. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay informed on the latest cases and investigations. The investigation concluded with a clear determination. The deaths of Precious Johnson and Kenneth William Terry Jr. were the result of a domestic murder-suicide. Authorities confirmed that Terry was responsible for shooting Johnson before turning the weapon on himself. Because the suspected perpetrator died at the scene, no criminal trial followed, and the case was officially closed after standard investigative procedures were completed. Law enforcement emphasized that the incident was isolated, with no indication of a broader threat to hospital staff, patients, or the public. The classification was supported by physical evidence, witness statements, and the absence of any additional suspects. The final report established that the events occurred within a confined time frame and location, eliminating the possibility of external involvement. Despite the clarity of the conclusion, the case raised procedural and situational questions that extended beyond the immediate outcome, particularly regarding hospital access, security protocols, and the events leading up to the confrontation. The determination of a murder-suicide relied on multiple layers of evidence. Medical examiner reports confirmed that Precious Johnson died from multiple gunshot wounds, while Kenneth Terry Jr. died from a single gunshot wound, identified as self-inflicted. Ballistic analysis indicated that the same firearm was used in both shootings. Investigators documented the positioning of both individuals within the hospital room, noting that there were no signs of forced entry or struggle involving additional parties. The confined nature of the scene supported the conclusion that the interaction occurred solely between the two individuals. Witness accounts further reinforced the timeline. Hospital staff and nearby individuals reported hearing gunshots in rapid succession, consistent with the sequence of a homicide followed immediately by suicide. Surveillance footage and visitor logs confirmed that Terry had entered the hospital as an authorized visitor and proceeded directly to Johnson's room. No evidence suggested the presence of a third individual. There were no indications of accomplices, external threats, or coordinated actions beyond the two individuals involved. The firearm was recovered at the scene, and no additional weapons were found. This combination of forensic evidence, witness testimony, and environmental analysis formed the basis for the final classification. The key investigative shift occurred when authorities confirmed the relationship between the victim and the suspect. Initial emergency response protocols treated the situation as a potential active shooter incident due to the hospital setting and unknown variables. However, once identification was established, the focus of the investigation narrowed significantly. Hospital records confirmed that Kenneth Terry Jr. was listed as a visitor connected to Precious Johnson. This immediately reframed the incident from a possible external attack to a domestic situation occurring within a controlled environment. The confirmation of their marital relationship provided context for motive and access. It explained how Terry was able to approach Johnson without resistance or suspicion, and why the interaction occurred in a private hospital room rather than a public area. This moment allowed investigators to reconstruct the timeline more accurately. Instead of searching for multiple suspects or external threats, resources were redirected toward understanding the dynamics between the two individuals and the sequence of events leading to the shooting. In the immediate aftermath of the gunfire, uncertainty dominated the response. Hospitals are considered high-risk environments during active shooter situations due to the presence of vulnerable individuals and limited mobility among patients. As a result, the initial assumption was that the facility might be under a broader threat. The hospital was placed on lockdown, and law enforcement approached the situation with protocols designed for active shooter containment. Officers secured entry points, evacuated certain areas, and searched for additional suspects. Early speculation included the possibility of an unauthorized individual entering the hospital with intent to harm multiple people. Questions were raised whether the incident was random or targeted beyond a single individual. These theories were gradually dismissed as more information became available. The absence of additional victims, the confined location of the incident, and the rapid identification of both individuals shifted the focus away from external threats. The initial misinterpretation did not impact the final outcome of the investigation, but it highlighted the challenges of responding to violent incidents in complex environments where information is limited in the early stages. The shooting occurred inside the Women's Center of Baptist Health Brookwood Hospital, specifically within the maternity unit where Precious Johnson was receiving postnatal care. Johnson was located in a hospital bed or immediate care area, consistent with her status as a patient recovering from childbirth at the time of the shooting. Terry was found nearby, indicating that both individuals were in close proximity at the time of the shooting. There were no signs of forced entry into the room and no evidence of a prolonged struggle involving multiple parties. The confined nature of the scene supported the conclusion that the interaction occurred solely between the two individuals. Hospital staff responded immediately after hearing gunshots, but by the time law enforcement secured the scene, both individuals had sustained fatal injuries. Emergency medical intervention was not able to reverse the outcome. The physical layout of the hospital unit, including controlled access points and visitor pathways, became a key factor in understanding how the suspect moved within the facility and reached the victim. Prior to the incident, Precious Johnson had completed childbirth and remained admitted in the maternity unit. Her movements were limited to her hospital room and designated care areas, as expected for a patient in recovery. On the day of the incident, Johnson was receiving standard postnatal care. There were no indications of unusual activity or external threats reported by hospital staff. Kenneth Terry Jr. arrived at the hospital as a visitor. Visitor logs and surveillance footage confirmed his entry and movement toward Johnson's room. There were no recorded incidents involved him prior to the shooting. The final interaction between the two occurred within the hospital room. No third-party witnesses were present inside the room at the time of the shooting, making the exact details of the conversation or confrontation unknown. The sequence of events suggests that the situation escalated quickly, with no extended delay between the start of the confrontation and the gunfire. Precious Johnson was 24 years old and had recently become a first-time mother. She was residing in Alabama and had entered the hospital for childbirth shortly before the incident. Her immediate circumstances were centered around the birth of her child and recovery within the hospital environment. There were no public records indicating involvement in criminal activity or external disputes unrelated to her relationship with Terry. Her role as a new mother placed her in a controlled medical setting, which typically includes restricted access and monitored visitation. This context is important in understanding the environment in which the incident occurred. Kyneth Terry Jr., 19 years old, was identified as her husband. His presence in the hospital was consistent with standard visitation practices for partners during childbirth and recovery. The relationship between the two became the central focus of the investigation, as it provided the primary context for the events leading up to the shooting. As investigators reviewed the timeline and background information, attention shifted to potential warning signs that may not have been addressed prior to the incident. Reports indicated that the couple had experienced relationship difficulties before the birth of their child. These issues were not formally documented in a way that would have triggered intervention from authorities or hospital staff. There was no confirmation of restraining orders, formal complaints, or prior law enforcement involvement related to domestic violence between the two. This absence of official records limited the ability of institutions to anticipate or prevent the incident. Another critical factor was the entry of a firearm into the hospital. Standard hospital security measures did not detect or prevent the weapon from being brought into the maternity unit. This raised concern